Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Views on VUE, the podcast with a view on Vue.js. My name is Steve Edwards. I am the host with the face for radio, but the voice for being a mime, but I'm still your host. Today, I am flying solo on the panel, and we are once again the international world-spanning podcast with our guest host, James Sinkala. How you doing, James?
I'm doing great. How are you, Steve?
Good to have you. James is calling from East Africa, the country, there we go, of Tanzania. And we're going to talk about Nuxt 3 and Supabase today. But before we get started, James, why don't you just give us a little background on yourself and tell us who you are, your development experience, why you're famous, whatever you want to tell us about yourself and your background.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve. So I'm James Sinkala. I'm a full-stack developer and technical writer. For the past couple of years, 3 years, I could say, I've focused more on technical writing. And of course, which brings us to the article that we are discussing today. And yeah, so it's a long story, but I can sort of put it short. What got me interested into programming was back from where I grew up. You know, everything that we saw on TV that was kind of, we couldn't explain bits on movies or whatever. People had this saying, they would just say, it's just the computer. And I never really understood that, but so it sort of was the answer for everything that we couldn't explain. It's the computer. And everybody seemed to sort of understand that. But I was curious, and the first time I came across one, I sort of had the understanding that, well, I think people do actually have a hand on creating these things. So that's where curiosity got me. And I said, okay, if people actually do write these programs, of course, I didn't understand the concept of programs back then, but I just had that understanding. If people do actually create these things, then I'd like to be one of those people who create stuff. As I say, the past 3 years is when I got into technical writing. And I had no idea that you could get paid writing technical contents. So, you know, discovering that was like some sort of new discovery, like sliced bread or something. So, yeah. So, and I'm a.
So you like, what is it you like about technical writing?
So how I started off was, you know, especially when you are writing programs, and there are these times where you delve into something that you haven't done before. So you'd want some sort of documentation that you could reference later on when you are dealing with the same thing again, instead of doing another research and going through documentations. You needed sort of a shortcut to do these tasks that you don't do as much. So you need some sort of reference. So I was writing reference for myself. Initially, I wasn't writing for anybody else. Then afterwards, you know, I got to enjoy it and, you know, getting the feedback that it was helping, you know, one or two people. Then I said, okay, maybe I could, I'm actually enjoying this. I could do more of this. And by then, I hadn't discovered that I could get paid doing so. Yeah, so that was an incentive after discovering that I could get paid writing.
Yeah, I'd like to do technical writing too, although it's not something that I would ever want to do full-time, just write for other people, because I like to write about my own stuff. You know, it's a lot easier to write about something that you know, as compared to just going to people, okay, now how do I explain this and how do I explain that? So,
right.
You know, my thing has always been, okay, I know how to do this and I had to solve a few problems, so let me write something for, you know, people so that they can understand it. And you know, I would like to do a lot more in terms of documenting code afterwards or writing, you know, wiki pages or stuff like that. But you know, that's time, and when you got development tasks to do, you don't always have the time.
Exactly.
I don't know if you're like me, but I could never write a creative story to save my life. You know, if I had to write a story and develop characters and a plot, no, forget it. Can't do that. I just don't have that creative juice at all.
I'm the same.
But get me to explain something technical or write a business letter or something like that, I'm your guy. For sure.
Yeah, so I think I'm the same. When it comes to writing creative stuff, the only memory I have was trying to draw some creative stories back in the days. So, you know, those stick figures, those are the best I could do.
Yes, best I could do. Yeah, I can't. I am artistically challenged to save my life. You know what's interesting though is,
Yeah.
do you know a guy named David Neal?
I
Um,
I think I might.
he's a Java. He's a developer, and he got into programming. I mean, into drawing. And I
Oh,
actually had him here on
interesting.
the podcast one time.
David Neal.
And I cannot Reverent Geek. That's all right. He goes by Reverent Geek on Twitter,
Oh,
and
okay.
he tells the story of how he got into drawing.
Yeah.
It was that he was doing conference presentations,
Right.
and he in one presentation he threw some really basic art into it, some sort of drawing, and he found that his audience was engaged so much more once he
Okay.
started doing that he started doing it, and he started watching YouTube videos, and he learned to draw. Now he's got like books that he puts out, and the good
Wow.
thing I think he did one book of dad jokes too. That was really cool. But he's
Oh,
got, if you follow him on Instagram or Twitter, he's always he's got arts and books and stuff. And he just learned to draw on his own, and it was all because as a developer, he didn't know the
yeah.
first thing about drawing, but as a
Right.
developer, he found that it really engaged his audience much better, and so it took off. And he was like me,
Interesting.
doesn't have an artistic bone in his body, but he learned how to do it. So it's something
Interesting.
you can learn how to do, for
Yeah.
sure. But
When you take the time, right? Yeah, stick figures was the best I could go with, writing sort of creative stories. But with technical writing, just as you referenced it, whereby you'd be creating something, then you say, okay, let me write about it. So just as I said, for me, I was writing references for myself, and if you go through the first articles that I've ever written, they are based of things that I had based on, let's say, features I had added to bigger projects that I was working on. So yeah, there was that, and it was kind of fun because. So the thing was, in the beginning, I was sort of nervous getting into writing. Putting your writing out there for people to scrutinize. So, and you know that there are people who are more technical than you. So there was a higher chance that somebody will come and say, "Oh, what is this?" Or they'll correct you, in public. So I sort of was nervous. But when I got to write my first article, and I can say Dev.2 sort of played a huge part in giving me the confidence to do so. So yeah, props to them. And yeah, I started posting over there. I initially started posting on my own website.
mhm.
Then there was not much traction over there because you need eyes to see your content before people start uh, giving attention to your own blog. So I got into dev.to. Then I added canonical URLs to my
Yes.
own website, and that's how
Right.
I sort of directed more traffic to my own blog.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of writing back when I had time, and it was cool because you could put the link to your own website and get traffic
Yes.
that way. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I've leveraged that a lot.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
really cool that they do that.
Yes. Really cool. Yeah. So, for instance, personally, I was when Hashnode came around, I also got into it, but I sort of got into Hashnode late, a bit late. But I also do add canonical URLs on my Hashnode posts. So I mostly do cross posting. I've
Hmm.
been doing that for the past year, I think. So I will
Hmm.
post an article on my blog, then afterwards, after a day or two, I'll post it on dev.to, then Hashnode, and
Hmm.
it sort of helped a lot establish the authority of your domain.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that it helps quite a lot.
Cool. So now when you were writing, this is before you got into actual doing development work. Is that right? Or did I get
No,
that timeline wrong?
I actually started development work, and well, I actually started a while back, around 2016,
Hmm.
late 2015 or early 2016. And back then, I had no idea that there were web frameworks, things like Laravel and all these other web frameworks that came along. I had no idea about those. So I started off with PHP. So you could
Hmm.
imagine I was writing spaghetti code.
Yes, that's where I started too. So been
Yeah,
there.
so I started off there, and initially, so looking back home, the music industry was sort of getting attention on this part of the continent, and I could say all over the continent. So I decided, and the thing that was lacking was a website, a lyrics website. So I decided to create a lyrics website. And so I said, okay, how am I going to do this? Initially, I just knew HTML. And, I started off with HTML. And I could remember I didn't have an idea how to do, direct one page to the next. So I sort of I was looking sort of the dynamic features for web, and I couldn't find those. So I remember using iframes. Yeah, so those are all these. And yeah, so that followed by, I started learning PHP through Google and the PHP website. Then I got to understand about serving servers, hosting websites, and everything. So it started off just by trying to create the lyrics website, and through it, having gone through those, let's say, adding features by feature, trying to understand the programming language itself, PHP, and later on, a friend of mine introduced me to Laravel, and from then on, I didn't look back.
Yes, I live in Laravel and Vue all day. So, yes. From the fact I had on this podcast, we had Taylor Otwell
interesting.
probably about 5 or 6 months ago, back in November, December, I think. It was great. It's one of my favorite interviews I've done.
I need to listen to that
particular podcast. Yeah, it's really pretty good.
Yeah.
That was a good time.
Yeah, good times. And interesting. So I think Laravel is how I got introduced to Vue.js and the whole front-end frameworks world. I never had an idea about that. But when they brought it into Laravel and I found it, I never looked back. Because I actually heard of React.js before, but I couldn't crack React.js then. Then just within the same time, I came across Vue.js on Laravel, and the documentation was just swift to just go through. And I could say maybe the documentation part, they did a good job at that. That's why I got into Laravel first, maybe. Yeah, so I do remember those days. I used to read the documentation while I was, in the bus. Wherever I was just reading through the documentation. So I really got fast into Vue.js, and I enjoyed it for a while. And I actually never looked back. Never got into React.js until last year. So I've just been mainly dealing with Vue.js, Nuxt.js, and the Vue.js ecosystem.
Right. Now, I'll give my usual push that I always do, particularly since I just lost a new app yesterday. Have you heard of Inertia.js?
Yes.
So
okay.
Inertia is the bomb. Inertia is so awesome, and it's so fast.
Okay.
So I use it with Laravel and Vue, and it's just,
Right.
real quick. It's just sort of a glue that glues the two together, and you pass your Laravel data to your front end components as props.
Right.
And it's doing everything behind the scenes and not doing a full browser reload, and it's got helper functions, and it works so well together. I just launched an app yesterday that I've been working on for a few months, and it's so fast, and it's just great. It's a lot of fun to work with. You can incorporate it with Tailwind, or you can use whatever framework you want. But what's nice is Laravel Breeze, which is one of their packages or distributions, I think you would call it, comes. Right. You can download Breeze and have it all set up and ready to go. Either that or Jetstream. But it has Laravel installed, it has Vue installed, it has Inertia installed, it has Tailwind installed.
Right.
And you're just up and going.
What does your app do?
It's an internal membership management, sort of a CRUD app for a private group that I belong to. So it's behind the scenes thing. It's not a public facing tool. But for what it does, it's awesome. And just hosted on Laravel Forge, with the DigitalOcean server. And
interesting.
That's a piece of cake. It's really a piece of cake.
Yeah,
so anyway, off of that, it's something to look into if you want to be able to integrate the two in a really good way. But enough of my. I swear people think that Jonathan Brennick's paying me for all my ads. But I always talk about inertia, but it's one of those things where if you like it, you talk about it. So
Yeah, that's how it goes. And honestly, that's what I've been doing mostly when it comes to writing content, apart from currently. So, for instance, this Nuxt and Supabase article, this was just based on one of the reasons being it was just, a good service that I enjoyed using back then. And I decided to write something about it. There was another reason to it. I think we'll talk about it later. And regarding inertia, I also came across inertia via Laravel. So I do remember they did introduce inertia and Livewire, if I'm not mistaken.
right. So Livewire uses what's the templating language? I can't believe I'm brain farting on what the templating language is. But yeah, Livewire just uses your literal templates. Blade. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, that's what Livewire is, and then
Inertia
Breeze.
is more of
Breeze you can use with React if you want to as well. So Breeze is a real basic implementation in terms of user authentication and capabilities, and then Jetstream is a more advanced version that has teams and some other functionality built into it too. And they suggest if you're not really familiar with Laravel to start with Breeze, and then use Jetstream if you need more functionality.
Interesting. And it's interesting that I sort of haven't been using Laravel that much. I used it last time I used it, I think, was a year or two ago when I was working on a certain project for a customer, because I've been freelancing over here in my locality for some time. And whenever I'm writing something that's a bit heavy, I always default to Laravel. So I do have much confidence with Laravel, especially when working on large projects. And the last project that I was working on was sort of like an e-learning platform. So yeah, and in that project I did use Laravel and Vue.js.
All right, so tell me about Nuxt and how you got into Nuxt, and I guess why you're using it as compared to a Vue SPA. I think as with most people will know that as with any JavaScript framework, you have what's sort of called a meta framework, that allows you to handle server-side rendering and for the SEO purposes and all that kind of stuff. React has Next. I can't remember. Angular has something, and Svelte has SvelteKit. So anyway, and we've talked plenty about Nuxt on this show with Drew Baker and Daniel Rowe and other people. But what got you into Nuxt?
So with Nuxt, the first time I came across Nuxt, I did have this habit of going through the Vue Awesome repo, where you just see a list of these plugins and etc. Articles, everything in between that had to do with Vue.js, and that's where I came across Nuxt.js. It wasn't from, I don't know, maybe a post or seeing somebody or a project. I just it was just through the Vue Awesome repository, and I decided to check it. Curious as always, and it was back then it was Nuxt.js, and there was this other framework. I might have forgotten it by now, which the maintainers actually stopped working on it. So yeah, I stopped also following on that. Then I focused on Nuxt. And just as you said, I mainly use Nuxt for, the SSR part, because handling that with Vue.js was kind of complex. And by this time, I actually had my personal website using Vue.js, and I was trying to sort of have my SEO on check. It was kind of complex getting your SEO on point. So I was looking for alternatives, and just as I said, I had come across Nuxt.js. So I sort of tried creating my website using Nuxt.js. Then there's this other website, actually the Lyrics website that I was talking about earlier. I came and rewrote it in Nuxt.js, from Laravel to Nuxt.js. And I enjoyed it, so I never stopped. And not jumping into maybe one of the next topics, but one of the reasons as to why I wrote this article, Supabase Authentication with Nuxt 3, was I went through the Supabase documentation, and I found that they actually had sort of within their documentation they had instructions on how to authenticate with Next.js, and I'm a Vue.js guy, so I said, okay, why don't they have one for Nuxt.js or Vue.js? So I decided to sort of have this write this article for the people who are actually using Vue.js and would like to use Supabase authentication with Nuxt.js.
Yes, authentication is a very thorny topic, very difficult. Seems like there's all kinds of different solutions.
It's quite opinionated.
Out there. Yeah, it's difficult to do, and there's solutions out there for authentication and how to handle it. The nice thing about the Laravel inertia stack for me is that Laravel takes care of that for me. It's got all this stuff built in. And
makes it very simple, very easy.
Yeah, so it's one less headache I got to deal with, right?
Exactly.
So there's lots of tools. I've heard people that have rewritten their own, and it's just time suck.
It gets messy. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about Supabase real quick. What it is, and what's an alternative to.
Yeah, so Supabase is in itself, as they say on the website, unless they have changed it, they are an alternative to Firebase.
Nope, that's the first sentence. Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative.
Exactly, yeah. So just as that sentence says it, they offer most of what you'd have with Firebase. For some people, the fact that Firebase being from Google, they have a problem with that. Personally, I actually moved from Firebase to. I initially used Firebase for a couple of projects, and the bundle size was a thing for me when it came to Firebase. It was one of those bottlenecks, and some other issues. And back then, I actually shifted over to FaunaDB from Firebase. And the reason that I came across and started working with Supabase, this was around last year. A certain platform had approached me, and they wanted me to create a course for them. So I said, okay. And they told me, okay, so what stack would you like to write on? Could you propose something? So I came up with ideas, and they gave me access to their platform, and they said, could you go through our platform and see what it is that we are lacking, and maybe you could compose something? And I said, okay. So I did a bit of research, went through their courses. I saw what was missing, which was mostly Nuxt.js. There wasn't, if my memory serves me right, there was nothing on Vue.js and Nuxt.js. So I did propose Nuxt.js, and on the database side of things, there was nothing on Supabase. So I proposed that. I proposed those stacks. We discussed on an ideal title for the course. Then I started working on the TOC, table of contents, and by the end of the composing of the table of contents, they sort of went AWOL. So
you sort of went what?
AWOL. They just disappeared. They weren't answering me. So I said, okay, so I've reached this stage, spent my time doing all this. Why not write something? And with that added caveat, whereby, as I said before, I went to the Supabase website, their documentation, they had nothing on Nuxt.js, but they did have documentation on authentication with Next.js. So I decided to pair those two and write something for myself, of course, and for general Nuxt.js community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was the backstory.
So they got docs, they actually function, I can use them. So yeah, those are good reasons to use something.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. So let's get into your blog post then about using Supabase with Nuxt. Right. So what's involved?
Okay, so as any other blog post, you just try to lay out what it is that the stack that you're talking about by their own definition what they are. Just basic stuff for those people who are totally new, let's say, for the stack. So I just went on with an introduction to Supabase. Just as we said, it's the open source Firebase alternative that presents us with backend features such as Postgres database, authentication, edge function, storage, etc. And an interest on this tutorial, the authentication part, and we're going to learn through how to authenticate Nuxt applications using Supabase. So a basic layout was, another interesting thing was, it was around the same time, I think, whereby Nuxt 3 came out of beta. It was around this time. So that's why I titled it Nuxt 3 instead of just Nuxt, because there was a focus on Nuxt 3 by then. And yeah, so we just go straight to setting up an Nuxt project using the new Nuxt tool. So we create a new Nuxt project, Nuxt 3 project, if I'd like to emphasize on that. Then just, take the reader through the basic setup, whereby we'll just be removing some scaffolding pages, etc., which we do not need for the example that we are going to, for the project that we are going to build. And the main focus, I think, especially when it comes to Supabase, was setting up the plugin. So the fact that they had the plugin, that was a big plus, because you aren't trying to figure out and be opinionated. Because if you're opinionated, I mean, people would like at least something to have a bit of order that's already handed over to them, just like we do have with Laravel. When you go through Laravel authentication, you're not questioning, why don't I do this way? They already have something set for you. You just go along with it, and you hope that they have done their best, the due diligence when it comes to making sure everything works. Yeah, so with Supabase, it's a good thing that they do have a Nuxt module. So we just set that up. Then we go over using these, I think, they are composables. And it's one of the new features of Vue.js that I really like. And there's something that I'll mention later. But yeah, I don't know if you do have specific questions on how we go about this post. Initially, after the introduction and, explaining what these two stacks are, Supabase and Nuxt.js, we go straight to detailing how we set up a new Nuxt project. And there was an emphasis on this, as I said before, because Nuxt 3 had just gone out of beta, and it was the official Nuxt version. So we went through showing the reader how to create a new Nuxt project using the new Nuxt init command. After running the script, the project will be exactly. Yeah, so the project will be created. Then we direct the reader on some files that we are not going to use, which is the default app.vue components. So we remove this because since the emphasis is on authentication, that means we are going to have multiple pages. So we go along and create pages to add pages. So we create a pages directory whereby we add an index page, we add a register page and a login page. Then within the login page, we just create a form with an email and password input. Then we head over to the register page and add a new form also, a registration form. So obviously, the most important parts are the email and passwords, but we do actually add a first name and surname. And these actually do have something to do with how you set up Supabase later on. So it depends on how much data you actually do have, or you do want your user to store, especially on the authentication part. Then afterwards, we just head over and create our index page, where we just, what we're trying to say is just welcome to the dashboard. So obviously, we do not want anyone who access the website or the app to have access to this page. So the following thing, we go ahead and set up the Supabase Nuxt module. So we install it and add it to the Nuxt configuration. We add it as a new module, and the Supabase Nuxt module gives us access to the use Supabase auth client, use Supabase client, and use Supabase user client-side view composables, which can be utilized to achieve the goal within this tutorial. So these three composables are what we are going to use intensively to handle all this authentication part of the project. And regarding the signing in part, so we set up a login function, which in the document, if anyone's reading this, you should see how we actually go ahead and first initiate a Supabase client and how we log in using that. So by this point, we actually cannot log in. We are just laying out everything, especially on the login page. And after having logged in, the user should be able to watch for the user composable and see if there's a value there. If there's no value, it should be if the value is available, that means the login was successful and you are directed to the index page, the one that we saw earlier. And yeah, so the watch effect, we actually use watch effect. You could use watch, but here we use watch effect to check if the user object is supplied by the use Supabase user composable. And so, just as we know, composables, they help how to import authenticated Supabase, so this specific composable, it helps to auto-import the authenticated Supabase user everywhere within the Nuxt app. So if the user is available wherever it is that he is authenticated and the user value or the user state is not null, that means we have a user logged in. The user will be redirected to the index page. Then the next part of the blog, we focus on registering users, and we create a register function that submits the registering users' details as filled in the provided form. And yeah, we lay out the code. So within the code, we use the use Supabase auth client composable to give access to a sign-up function that takes some arguments, which, as I say, the most important are email and password. And we also have an options object which we can pass, which enables us to specify the redirection URL after the user has successfully registered. And also, so you can set up email redirect to, which actually sends the email verification, the verification email, which is received by the user. And we have also a data option, which specifies the extra information about the registering user being submitted along with the authentication credentials. As we had in the form the first name and the surname. So next, we follow up on logging the user out, this is the simplest part of this tutorial. What we just need to do is so we have two ways to go about it, or two parts, I can say. The first is just calling the authentication sign out function. Then the most important part is adding a middleware, which will check if the user object is populated or it's not. So we actually had an authentication middleware, as you would see in the code, which just checks if user.value, if user is not, user.value is null, you just get redirected to the login. Otherwise, you remain where you are. So maybe in this case, you're in the index page. And to apply the middleware, you have to set it up by using define page meta, and you add it under the middlewares. So you have to set this up for every page that you do not want unauthenticated users to have access to. And yeah, the next part is about the logging users out, which of course I've already explained. Well, you just need to call the authentication sign out function. Then you could two ways to go about it. Afterwards you could redirect users to the login page, or you could use watch effect to check if the user object is populated or if it's null. If it's null, obvious, you'd like to maybe redirect users to the login page or whatever the starting page of your application or website is. Then the following part. So this is also another opinionated part. I direct the user to create a navigation bar in which you have the links to these separate pages and a button to log the user out. And this is just as far as it goes to just set up the components that this app might have that will help the user move from one point to the next. And the middleware, which actually adds a guard for us. And yeah, so that's likely most about, it's on the part of the Nuxt app. Then the next part of the article focuses on setting up setting up Supabase for a Nuxt 3 app. So this involves creating a Supabase account and proceeding. Yeah.
So the gist of all this, I mean, you can only mouth code so much, obviously, and if you're looking at the blog post, there's plenty of code samples and GIF samples of the screens and what it looks like and stuff. I think what I'm gathering from reading this is it seems pretty straightforward. You basically create a Supabase account. They have a plugin. You install it. You set your credentials. And then you go from there. There's some coding you'll have to do, obviously. Now I'm curious that you had. It looks like you had to specifically make some tables, inside of your database to store the data. Is that right?
Yes.
The plugin doesn't handle stuff like that for it. Well, I guess not. It wouldn't, would it?
Yes. So the plugin actually doesn't. But with Supabase, especially when you are setting up authentication, there are some tables that you are not specifically setting up because you're just activating them, something like that. So you're not sort of creating new tables per se, because they do actually support authentication as, I think, a first-class citizen. And when you scroll down, you should see the part about authentication providers, whereby you have so it provides all these options for authentication. You could use these auth authentication services like Apple, Bitbucket, Facebook, etc. Or you could just use the email option, which is the one that I'm actually displaying within this blog post.
Yeah, it's quite interesting looking at the available auth providers that you can use. Anything from Azure to Facebook, GitHub, GitLab, Google, Spotify,
Notion,
Slack, Twitter. So yeah, that gives you quite a impressive list of options if you don't want to do the simple email stuff.
Yeah, and I focus more on email because I think I saw something on using these other providers. I'm not so sure where I saw this, whether within their own documentations or somewhere on the web, but there was no option for the basic email. So that's why I focused on on using the email provider, which is I could say what most developers initially set up their projects.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how I do. Alrighty. So is there anything else we need to cover about your blog post or Supabase or Nuxt or anything we missed that isn't covered by your blog post?
For the Supabase part, I don't think there's that much. But it was interesting when I was contacted with Michaela, when you guys were interested with this. And in all honesty, actually this article received quite traction, which I was surprised. I didn't expect it because It's one of these. It's one of the articles that I had set up this target for myself early this year. I sort of set up this target of writing 30 articles in 30 days. So
Wow, that's a lot of writing.
you could tell it was that was a lot of writing and sleeping quite a bit. So yeah, and I think this was the first one in that span of time. This was the first one, and I was quite amazed by the attention that this one received. And it was the first time that I was trying, I actually posted this on using a thread format. I didn't just post it like what I do with my other blog posts, just with a single blog post with some explanation, etc. I actually posted this in a thread format. So whoever will go through the thread will get the gist of all of this blog posts. And if they were interested to, read more, they will go to the blog post itself. So it was very interesting seeing that it got distraction.
Yeah, that's sort of funny about writing posts when you do a lot of publishing and writing, is that you never know what's going to take off, right? You could write a little blog post. I'm just going to write this for myself, and yeah, maybe it'll help somebody, and then it just takes off, and the one you think, oh, this is awesome, I got all kinds of great information here, doesn't do so well, right?
Exactly, yeah. So that's true, because I actually have written a couple of detailed, like really detailed blog posts, and they actually never got attention. I'll put this one along those, the same breath as one of those posts that I had lots of details in it. But there are these two specific blog posts that were CSS based. So one was on creating what I currently know as, the skeletal loading animation. I never knew that it was called skeletal loading animation back then. I don't remember the name that I used, but I used something like placeholder or something. I think it's one of my most read posts on dev.to. Yeah, so it was crazy. The traction it got, I never understood. I couldn't figure out. So on the following week, I wrote another one that was CSS based, also on creating animations, different kind of animations using SVGs. And that also got crazy attention. And for some reason, I said, okay, I'm going to stop writing about animation because I don't want this to be the focus, of my writing. Because I could go along with that, and I don't know where that would have led me, but overall, I really enjoyed that people are finding those useful, and the sort of they got all the traction. But in my writing overall, I thought that it could have this impact that I never, planned initially. So I actually stopped writing such blog posts that brought such attention. Yeah.
Oh, dude, you could have been wealthy. Just start writing. Everybody wants to read your content. You get paid, right? Just think about it.
Yeah, I could have. Yeah, I could have. Thinking about it, maybe I could have. But not having proceeded with that route maybe set me out for where I am currently, and which is a good place, and I really like. As I initially mentioned that. After figuring out that, okay, writing actually can help you get paid, that was sort of a new discovery for me. And I sort of focused more on, understanding the concepts and trying to write things that a broader readership could really get something of value out of. And yeah, and interesting also, another post that sort of got traction was I wrote one blog post on Rust. It was sort of a beginner's blog post for Rust. And it was the first time I actually read, it was the first time I got into Rust. That was like a year ago. And I started reading this Rust book. I've forgotten the title of the book. So I said, okay, let me write something just based off what I've collected on Rust so far. So I wrote that blog post. Then in 2 weeks, I wrote another one. And those two blog posts on Rust sort of got that traction that I also never expected, because there are those blog posts, as you were saying earlier, you just write and never expect. And I actually got offers to write for some blogs out of those ones.
All right. So with that, we will wrap up
interesting.
our talk about Nuxt and Supabase and all that. Like we said, if you want to read James' posts and play with it, we'll have the link in the show notes. So with that, we'll move on to picks. Picks are the part of the show where we get to talk about anything we want to talk about, really, that may or may not have to do with tech. We've had all kinds of interesting things picked here on the show. So I will start with the high point of any of my podcast episodes, which are the dad jokes of the week.
Okay.
So let me need my sound effects ready. Here we go. Excuse me. I went to my doctor the other day, and because I had this surgery scheduled, and I said, "Man, doctor, I'm nervous. This is my first operation." He says, "That's okay. Don't worry. It's mine too." Yeah. Nothing like instilling confidence in your patients, right?
Yeah. Who was more nervous?
Here's a question. Yeah, right. So here's a simple question. Why was Dr. Frankenstein never lonely? He was good at making friends.
Right.
Right? He made his friends.
Created them
literally.
himself.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. He was one of those real creative kind of guys, you know? And then...
crazy creative.
Right. I was driving along the other day and saw this roadside stand, on the side of the road. It said lobster tails, $2. I'm like, oh, that sounds like a good deal. So I paid my $2, and instead of giving me the lobster, the guy says, once upon a time, there was this lobster.
Lobster tails.
So lobster tails, right? Tales. And those are the dad jokes.
You got a tail instead of... Yeah, I'd like to add a couple, maybe two.
Go for it. It's your turn. You're up. What are your picks?
Okay, these are my two picks. So my friend Jack claims he can communicate with vegetables. Jack and the beanstalk.
Jack. Very good. I've seen that one. Jack and the Beanstalk. That's right.
Yeah.
Wonder about friends like
funny
that.
Funny story behind this, and funny story is this. So Jack and the Beanstalk was actually the first English book. No, it was the first English storybook that I got to read as a kid.
Oh wow!
So
okay.
I remember.
So you really appreciate that joke, then, don't you?
Yeah, it hits close to home. Yeah. Yeah, so there are memories. Yeah, so at the age of 65, my grandma started walking 10 kilometers a day. She's 92 now, and we don't know where she is.
Very good, very good. Another classic one. I think I just saw that here recently. So
yeah,
Grandma, come back. You can stop walking now. Right.
Yeah. So can I sort of share another dark? This one's a bit dark because with this joke, this is a true story. My grandma on my mother's side, my maternal grandma, she was mad. She was angry. I don't remember how old she was back then, but she was pretty old, maybe in her 80s or something. So she was, somebody made her angry for some reason. Somebody pissed her off. She decided to just leave the house, and she walked away, and she never came back up to this day. Yeah, so this is another joke that hits close to home.
Wait a minute here, delayed jump joke. Sorry, gotta work on the sound effects. Okay. All right, did you have any other actual picks for us besides the dad jokes, or was that it?
Maybe I could share what I'm doing currently.
Yes. So we'll call that a shameless
I never
plug.
Mentioned this before. Yeah, so this is my shameless plug. I'm actually a technical writer currently for Chisel Strike. So mainly currently what we are doing is we have this H database called Turso. It's based off LibSQL. LibSQL is an open source, open contribution fork of SQLite. So what you're offering is, your data at the edge. And I've actually been writing lots of content on a Medium account. I have a Medium account currently. As earlier, I just mentioned dev.to and Hashnode. So with Turso, I sort of got into the Medium space. As a writer, I was sort of nervous getting into Medium for some reason. But currently, I'm actually almost all the time writing on Medium. Yeah, so people should check Turso out if they're interested with storing or fetching their data from the edge. Yeah, so
it's Chisel Strike. Is it? Am I saying that correctly? Chisel Strike.
Chisel Strike.
Okay, gotcha.
Exactly.
So it allows you to store your data at the edge when you say so on a CDN somewhere, so it's quicker to access.
Something close to that, something like that. But it's sort of so just as we have with these, let's say, distributed compute with what we have with Netlify, what they offer with their edge functions. Services like Netlify, Vercel, and Cloudflare. So with data at the edge, we are moving also the databases at the edge, because you could have your compute at the edge and still be fetching your data from these centralized servers, from centralized clusters, which wouldn't help that much, and at times will be actually more expensive. So with data at the edge, that means where the compute is, we also place the data over there. So this really helps in lowering the latency and making access to, makes our websites really fast. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure if you Google Turso, Turso,
right,
you'd find lots of stuff on that. And you might find a couple of articles from me, so.
Yes, I've just found the link on Medium here, so I'll make sure and add that into the show notes as well.
Okay.
So, all righty. Well, thank you for coming, James. It was good to talk to you about your post.
Thanks, Steve.
If you want to learn more about Supabase and Nuxt and how to authenticate, then read the blog post. And with that, we will say goodbye, and we will talk to everybody next time on Views on Vue.